Good morning. Welcome to worship at Unity Church-Unitarian, a spiritual home where we strive to live lives of integrity, service, and joy. I'm Nancy Dilts, worship associate, and I use she, her pronouns. From many places of the Spirit, we gather this morning. We gather on the homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe nations. We honor with gratitude the people who have stewarded the land throughout the generations and their ongoing contributions to this region. We gather as longtime members and as first-time visitors. If this is your first time attending a service, we invite you to complete a visitor card available in the pews and online so that we can provide you with more information about our congregational life. All are welcome to attend the Finding Yourself at Unity conversation held today at 10:15 in the Gannett Room. We hope you'll return to the sanctuary this afternoon at 4 o'clock, where guest conductor Dr. Alexander Lloyd Blake, the founding artistic director of the internationally acclaimed choral ensemble Tonality, will lead singers from the Minnesota Chorale and Border Crossing to present Singing Truth, an American Conversation. This concert is presented free of charge, and details and seat reservations are available online at mnchoral.org. After the service today, Reverend Kathleen and I look forward to greeting those of you present in person, and we invite you to visit the parish hall for refreshments and fellowship. Those joining us online are invited to Zoom coffee hour. And now, let us enter into worship with the ringing of the bell.
Let there be truth heard in the words we speak and the songs we sing. Let there be help and healing for our disharmony and despair. Let there be silence for the voice within, among, and beyond us. Let there be joy in our coming together. May we hallow our time together by the kindling of the flame of our heritage. Come, let us worship together. Once more, Atonement Day has come.
All pretense gone, and naked heart revealed to the hiding self.
We stand on holy ground between the day that was and the one that must be.
We tremble at what did we gain?
How did we stumble? What did we take?
Last year's confession comes easily to the lips.
Will this year's come for deeper than the skin?
Say then, why are our paths strewn with promises like fallen leaves?
Say then, when shall our lust be for wisdom?
Say now.
Love and truth shall meet, justice and peace shall embrace. And we gather for worship. We set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. And together we recognize that the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. This day we pray for our neighbors in prison and those who care for family members in ill health, and those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days. We pray for those in harm's way and for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world and the people, and for the people of this courageous congregation, as together we live into our longing to embody and help build beloved community. Will you pray with me now for all those we name? We extend our care to the family of Billy Webb, who died early Monday. That was Monday, September 26th, at the Gardens Episcopal Home. We send our love and our blessings to his beloved wife, Linny, and treasured daughters, Delaney and Willie. A memorial service will be held here at Unity later this month. We send healing prayers to Tom Coffey's father, who is admitted to hospital this week for shortness of breath and pneumonia. He's recovering and expected to be released to physical therapy after he's feeling better. We extend love and care to Remus Huber, a child of Mike Huber, who was hit by a car this week. They suffered a mild concussion and some intense bruising, but otherwise are okay, and they are recovering at home. We are holding Wendy Enger, a close friend of Helen Polig. Wendy's home in Fort Myers Beach is presumed to be a total loss as a result of the hurricane, and we are grateful to know that she is safe. We turn our hearts to the interdependent web of care that also concern us as we offer our prayers and later our tangible gifts of support for all those affected by the devastation caused by Hurricane Ida this week. We mourn the death of Mahsa Amini, the Iranian woman who died in custody of the Iranian morality police. And we are in solidarity with the Iranian people whose protests defend freedom, justice, human dignity, and rights for women. We stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here and at home and all around the world. May they and may we be instruments of a just and lasting peace. I invite you now to speak aloud the names of those persons on your heart or mind today as we hold them in the silent sanctuary of our hearts and minds. Jan and Mike and Chet. O thou source of infinite compassion, bring that compassion into our hearts this day. May we find the courage to embrace both the wounds and the wonder of this world. As we long for a world where human dignity is embraced and celebrated, may our longing be strengthened into action, into deeds of service and prayer, infused with integrity and embraced by joy. This is the one wild and precious life we have been given. How will we choose to spend it? May we continue this prayer in a moment of silence. Gift. What an incredible gift the music is and the music program. Thank you. This is the month when we especially think about gifts, the gifts that you give in the form of your pledge to support this church. And October 16th will be our Canvas Sunday. But before we take this morning's offering, I wanted to invite Worship Associate Nancy Dilts first to talk a little bit about why she and her family continue to come and have made this their church home and continue to support Unity. Nancy.
When my husband Dan, our daughter Grace, and I began attending Unity in 2015, we were looking for a faith community where all of us felt at home. I was a cradle Episcopalian, and after years of increasing struggle to make the Episcopal denomination work for our family, even I was ready to make a change. Unity immediately felt like a place where we were welcomed, embraced, really, in our individual spiritual journeys and as people. There was room for all of us and all of our beliefs here. And while it took a while for me to get used to the different liturgical rhythms, UU values reflected my family's values so directly that we couldn't imagine going back. I eventually even felt ready to sign the book, fully committing as a Unitarian Universalist. As we settled in at Unity, I started to notice an energy among our community. Everyone seemed quite cheerful, freely themselves, dare I say, confident. The ministers and staff, people we talked with, even the kids, they roamed the place with ownership, like it was their home. At some point I said to Dan, there seems to be this Unitarian confidence. Have you noticed that? Yes, he said. Unitarian confidence. Why is that? We've talked about it multiple times since joining Unity. Most recently, right after Rob Eller Isaac's memorial service. His was a strong Unitarian confidence, and Jan's continues to be so. Does that confidence in your own sense of self come from the Unitarian Universalist principles? That every person can be one more redeemer with inherent dignity and worth? That we embrace justice, equity, and compassion for all in our search for meaning, truth, and peace? Most certainly it does. It's not to say that there aren't areas of growth at Unity and among our community. Of course there are, and that's the beauty of it. Even in our imperfection, the Unity community is striving to provide a place of deep spiritual meaning from which we can make positive change in the world. We all make mistakes, we all experience conflicts, and we all have pain. But instead of giving up or assigning blame, and even when we do, we pick ourselves up and work to support each other in the hard times. That is why my family is at Unity, and that is why we pledge to the church. That's why Dan and I have pledged to Unity in the past and will pledge again for this year's Canvas. We feel embraced here in our beliefs and in our whole imperfect selves. It is a place where we can grow as the people we want to be, living with integrity and service and joy. And we do that with the support of this community, and say it with me, Unitarian confidence. One more time, Unitarian confidence. I am confident in Unity's future. Are you? Please join us in pledging as generously as you are able in this year's pledge drive. We together make this community, and we want it to continue to provide a spiritual home for us and for those who come after us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Just to let you know, there is a pledge table in the parish hall. If you want to stop by there, you can also pick up a pledge form at the table or online. As far as our offering today, it will be given 100% away to the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee's Emergency Relief Fund, and those funds will, of course, go to support the relief efforts as a result of Hurricane Ida. So please give as generously as you can. Will the ushers please come forward now? Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Thank you.
Transformative Forgiveness from See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. 2 days after 9 Black people were massacred by a white supremacist in a historic Black church in Charleston in June 2015, their family members showed up at his bond hearing, looked into his eyes, and said, "I forgive you." I felt sick to my stomach. This man did not deserve their forgiveness. I worried that saying these words too quickly cut short our right to express our divine rage publicly and internally. Yet these family members chose to forgive as a declaration of their own autonomy, as if to say, no matter what you do to us, we will not allow you to make us hate you. I thought about my own community's choice to pray for the gunman after the mass shooting of 6 in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Forgiveness was not a substitute for justice. It had energized us in the fight for justice. It reframed justice, not as retribution, but as cultural and institutional transformation.
Have you ever been given a second chance? Another opportunity to make something right? Well, you could say my job as an interim minister is all about second chances. Seriously, because in every church I have served, I have made mistakes. And I have always been given a chance to own up to those mistakes, to begin again with the same congregation, but generally within 2 years with a new congregation where I can make new mistakes. Or I can remember and apply the learnings from my past mistakes. I have been so grateful for many second chances throughout my life. The chance to go back and live with my parents when I needed to figure out next steps. The chance to break a cycle of addiction or a habit which has long outlived any purpose it once served. So life gives us second chances all the time, and sometimes those second chances aren't moral decisions. They are occasions of grace. We wait for the biopsy results, and it turns out the tumor is benign. Or we are given life-saving medical interventions to buy us more time to spend with loved ones and to consider how we wish to spend the time we have. We lose a beloved spouse or partner and against all odds find love again or find meaning and pleasure in our lives as a single person. We get a second chance to begin again. I think there is a longing in all of us who share this human condition, a longing to be in right relationship with ourselves, with our families, our communities, and the universe itself. If there is any wisdom in the ancient biblical story that was interpreted as original sin, it can be found in the way that this story mythically identifies this feeling of being separated from our original blessing. Whenever we make a mistake, whenever we do harm, with or without intention, I think all of us experience that longing, and all of us welcome an opportunity for a second chance, a chance to make it right, a chance to restore what we say is right, called right relationship. Now, most faiths have a ritual or ritual ways of addressing this longing and inviting right relationship as a spiritual practice. And today we are approaching that ritual day in the Jewish liturgical calendar of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, at-one-ment. And Yom Kippur asks of us something very personal and particular, to repair a relationship when we either ask for forgiveness or offer forgiveness to another. Yom Kippur invites us to reflect on the very difficult and challenging task involved when we break covenant with human community. Most Unitarian Universalist congregations remember and honor these high holy days of between Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, and many today will speak the words in our hymnal written by your minister emeritus, Rob Eller Isaacs. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again. I know you're wanting me to complete that phrase, which you've said many times. We begin again in love. But forgiveness, I want to say, is not an instant process, and it doesn't usually begin in love. And in that respect, I am with Valerie Carr, whose reading you just heard. I can't seek or offer forgiveness as a spiritual leap based in faith, the way the families at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston was able to do. And I want to explain why. When I was serving as an interim minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Annapolis, a gunman entered the Capital Gazette newspaper room and killed 5 people. One of the persons he murdered was Wendy Winters. She was a long-time and much beloved member of the church. She was on the interim search committee that brought me to Annapolis. She insisted I give blood for the Red Cross drive that she organized every year. She was a force of nature. And I, unlike those families from the Mother Emanuel Church who looked Dylan Roof in the eye and forgave him, I could not forgive the man who did this. It took me a long time to stop hating him, to let go of the hate, because hate poisons the soul. But that experience made me realize more deeply the Jewish wisdom that forgiveness is a two-way street. It's a process that requires something of both the perpetrator of harm and the victim of harm. And Yom Kippur provides a path so that one day, with practice, we can begin again in love. I can't force myself to love, but I can commit to engage in an ongoing practice and process of forgiveness. So if Yom Kippur is the spiritual season of second chances, then I am encouraged by this process in Hebrew of tshuva, turning. And much has been written, and perhaps you've no doubt heard sermons that describe the steps in turning. In my own life, I framed those steps with 3 words: reckoning, remorse, and repair. When we inflict harm on each other, intentionally, unintentionally, or sometimes intentionally, having a second chance must first involve your own reckoning, your own awareness of the harm done, a confession and expression of remorse to the person or people harmed, and an attempt to repair the harm done and restore the relationship. So I want to look at each one of these because it is not uncommon for us to just take 1 or 2 of these steps and feel spiritually satisfied that we've done well with our repair, with our second chance. A reckoning is the awareness that we have harmed another person by our words or our deeds. You know what that feels like. You know, first of all, it might be a light bulb in the head, or it might be more likely that feeling in your gut that something is not right. Maybe it's shame or anger we feel when a person we've harmed has the courage to tell us directly. I recall vividly an experience I had of reckoning early on in my career as a minister. 25 years ago, I was serving my first congregation in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I began attending an ecumenical group of clergy who were doing faith-based organizing. As it happened, all of whom were African-American pastors. And throughout the course of the year, we had built a relationship of mutual trust and support. Mid-year, the clergy group decided to host an interfaith service honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and that holiday. Well, the date was quickly approaching, and we hadn't made any firm decisions about the shape of the service. So I became impatient with the slow nature of this group process. So I said, look, I don't mean to be a slave driver here, but we've got to make some decisions pretty soon. Thank you for that response, right? Oh no, the room fell silent for a moment. And then one minister with whom I was building a meaningful friendship continued on to discuss the service without challenging me and without excluding me from the conversation. Okay, true confession here. I didn't even realize what I had said until later when the memory came up in an anti-racist training about microaggressions. I felt deeply ashamed of how clueless I had been about this remark, and I realized many other expressions that I had used over time were equally harmful or simply an expression of white supremacy culture. It was an important time of reckoning for me in my own self-understanding of what it means to be part of a white-dominated group. So what do we do with this reckoning? Sometimes our first response is shrouded in defensiveness. I'm sorry, but that's not an apology. We try to excuse our behavior. We protest our innocence. We try to shift the blame to the other person. But if we dig even a little deeper, we know that those attempts will not restore relationship. In fact, sometimes they can make things worse. A reckoning begins with an acknowledgement of damage done and that we, not somebody else, caused the harm. And that's hard. I think about, why is it hard for me? And it's because I have to acknowledge I'm not perfect. It means I have to acknowledge that I am capable of causing harm. Now, many of you have probably heard Reverend Rob preach on the Hindu phrase, Tat Tavan Asi, which is Sanskrit for I am that too. And if you weren't there for a sermon, you probably noticed the phrase on his license plate. It is a sobering reality to realize that each of us is capable of incredible generosity and goodness and love. And each one of us is capable of intemperate speech, of hurtful anger, and yes, of evil. And in our anti-racism work as white people, we discover the ways in which we are born in the waters of white supremacy culture, and that has a profound impact on what we think and do and say and act. So I knew I needed to express remorse and regret for the remark I had made, and I sought out my friend and colleague who had, in a way, let me off the hook during that meeting. So I expressed my remorse privately. And I took the second step in the process of turning the step of confession and remorse face to face. I was grateful for the way my colleague offered me his forgiveness, but looking back on it now, it was too quick and easy. He said to me, you know, I have to deal with stuff like this kind of thing all the time. And then he said, I know you. You have a good heart. He told me that that one outburst had not damaged my relationship with colleagues that I had grown to cherish. So I was quickly given a second chance at continuing these relationships, and yet I never finished the process of teshuvah with that group. I never explored what it might mean to repair the breach that I may have created. Repair, as we like to say here at Unity, is complicated. It's complex. It's complex and complicated interpersonally and collectively. Interpersonally and in congregational life, it may not be immediately obvious that there has been a reckoning and an expression of remorse of what it would look like then to repair. And this is where we have to remember the wisdom that atonement and forgiveness is a two-way street. I told you earlier that I have made mistakes in every congregation I've served. I've hurt people unintentionally. Sometimes, I'm ashamed to say, intentionally. I've committed sins of omission and commission. And as I was thinking about today's sermon, I wondered, what mistake will I make at Unity? Will I not make the same mistake again? At the same time, in each congregation, I have also encountered generous church members who, when asked for their forgiveness, granted it and never held those mistakes against me. Repair came because we were able to continue to work together on projects that were meaningful to both of us and to the church. There was a mutual trust that the learning from the breach in covenant was authentic and the desire to begin again in love was sincere. So when someone gives you a second chance to do better, it changes you. It breaks your heart open a little bit and makes you more likely to extend that second chance to someone who has hurt you. Earlier this month, your board president and I met with Reverend Ashley Horan. Many of you know Ashley. She's a child of this church. She grew up is a member of this church. She found her calling to ministry and was ordained by Unity. She, like many others, spoke up at the May 22nd congregational meeting prior to the vote to affirm or not to affirm the candidate for senior minister. And as I continue to process with you the impact of that vote and the meeting itself, it became clear to me that for some, the words that Ashley spoke at that meeting were hurtful. So Louise and I asked Ashley to reflect on her comments and write a letter to the Board of Trustees, which the board will be receiving next week. I'm not going to share the entire letter with you this morning, but I do want to share an excerpt, and I do this with the board president and Ashley's permission. Quote, Board President Louise Livesey and Interim Senior Minister Reverend Kathleen Rolenz recently invited me into a conversation to discuss my participation in the congregational meeting on May 22nd. They asked me to share my intentions in speaking publicly that day, and I listened as they described the concern, hurt, and anger that several people experienced in the wake of my comments. I heard clearly in that conversation that my words felt like rebuke and shaming, coming not from me as an individual, but from a clergy person and representing the UUA itself. Later on in the letter, she continues, I made a serious mistake in not anticipating that my words at the congregational meeting would carry such weight and be experienced as coming from the institution for which I work. I acknowledge and regret this significant miscalculation, and I sincerely apologize for the hurt and distress my comments contributed to the situation. End quote. Forgiveness is a two-way street. We must first acknowledge the harm we caused with the realization that forgiveness may not be granted to us immediately. Depending on the level of harm and whether the breach this harm caused is irredeemable, but the person who was harmed also has a role and responsibility in this process. In Judaism, if a person comes to you in humility and with complete sincerity and fully acknowledges the harm and offers and makes amends and asks for your forgiveness, this is now where the burden of forgiveness shifts to you. In other words, in Judaism, God lays the responsibility of releasing you from the burden of the hardness of your heart on you. This is an important part of the process of repair. For me, the process of teshuvah, of reckoning, remorse, and repair, it offers a powerful alternative to what we see happening all around us among states within our nation, which is blaming. In most situations of conflict, it seems our easiest response is to locate the blame. Blame is different from accountability. Blame points the finger. Accountability starts with reckoning itself. And sometimes I am to blame, and sometimes you are to blame. Sometimes there are conflicts or tragedies in which no one is to blame. I don't know, who is to blame when siblings discover their childhood bonds do not sustain them through adulthood? Who is to blame when a marriage ends, not because of abuse or addiction or infidelity, but the gradual growing apart of two lovely people? Who's to blame, for example, when I discovered my punk rock friend from college that I hadn't kept up with entertained the idea of becoming a Proud Boy and is an election denier? How is this possible? Who should I blame? Well, in ancient Israel, they had a ritual way of assigning blame, which was once part of the season of Yom Kippur. They would pick a goat from among the people. The priest would wash himself pure, lay his hands on the goat, and on the laying of his hands, put all of the people's sins, their mistrust, their hatred, their misdeeds. The priest would take them on himself and then transfer them to the goat. And then the goat would be led out of the center of town, and people would jeer and throw mud and stones as the goat passed by, therefore transferring their guilt onto the goat. And the goat would be led outside the walled gates and sent out to the wilderness, presumably to die, and with it, all of the people's sins for that year. This is, of course, where we get the word scapegoat, because it is in our human nature to want to shift blame from ourselves, from situations beyond our control, to others who have wronged us. Ancient Israelites knew something about human nature, that we want to place the blame on something, but this practice of tshuva is more sophisticated than that. It asks us, and this is really important, to construct a narrative of our life together, who we are, who the other person is, and not just about what happened. What if we said this? I don't want to tell you what happened. I want to tell you how it felt. I think we're learning that facts are less knowable than our feelings in some circumstances. What we feel, what we do with those feelings, that is the path to forgiveness. You hurt me. I hurt you. I'm sorry. You deserved better from me. These things are hard to say. Sometimes even harder to hear when I am not ready to forgive, when my ego's bruised, when my sense of rightness about the world has been challenged, when I am ashamed or embarrassed about my own human failings. When we give each other a second chance, I think it's the closest thing to heaven I'll ever experience, because it feels clean, it feels light. Long ago, I gave up the idea that heaven is a place where I'll go where I die. Instead, I understand it's a feeling. It's a feeling we share in the here and the now. It's a feeling of connection and community. It's a feeling of knowing and being truly known. And being loved not in spite of our failings, but because of them. It's what we're longing for in our covenant to create the beloved community. It's what we find when we give ourselves and each other a second chance. And this time, to begin again in love. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. Give ourselves and each other, we begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause. Forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For the selfishness that sets us apart and alone. We give ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit. Forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. May you take the lessons offered here today into your heart, those of reckoning and remorse and repair. May you offer forgiveness to others. May you receive requests for forgiveness from others so that you can begin again and 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 again in love. May it be so.